Happy spring, everybody. Today's the first day of spring, and in accordance with the idea of new beginnings, we hope that we can give you some fresh ideas and inspiration today on the first day of spring. My name is Susan North, and I want to welcome all of you to our panel, Raising Children Together Apart. I'd like to thank the SCMA for hosting today, and especially to Bouvier Yulin, who is our doing everything behind the scenes to make this a wonderful event. Thank you, Bouvier. First, I'd like to introduce the panelists that I asked to speak today on this topic. Judith Weigel has been a divorce mediator for a number of years. She provides both mediation and filing services for divorces, legal separations, paternity cases, and post-judgment revisions of settlement agreements. She's the host of the Amicable Divorce Expert podcast, and her philosophy is be honest and authentic, speak from the heart, and take responsibility for your actions. Welcome, Judith, and thank you.
Thank you.
Marvin Whistler is a seasoned mediator with over 30 years of experience, in many areas of mediation, but including marital issues, divorce, parenting plans, custody, and visitation. I had the opportunity to co-mediate with Marvin at Southern California Family Mediation, and it was an honor to watch a master at work. Thank you and welcome, Marvin.
Thank you.
I also thought it would be a good idea to have a family therapist on hand because this topic is so fraught and so filled with psychological meaning and importance. So I invited my friend Carol Schneider, we've been friends for ages and ages, to bring her psychotherapeutic expertise. She has worked with children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families, and she's done therapeutic intervention with high conflict dissolution and custody cases. Later, her work was involved in the courts, working as an expert witness and as a child advocate. Thank you for adding your perspective, Carol, and welcome.
Thank you, Susie.
Before we start, I would like to just ask a quick question, like sort of a round robin for all of you. What makes parenting mediation different from fighting over custody in court? What to you is sort of the essence of mediation, the mediation's strong points? What are the advantages, do you think, of mediating that way instead of fighting it out in court?
Opening up to all of us, Susan?
Yeah, please. Yeah, Judith, why don't you?
Okay. So we're all mediators, therefore we see this as the kinder, gentler way to move through decisions, and it allows for interaction. So that's really good, given that the parents can interact well. And I think it's up to the mediator to guide that, to take two people that are very emotional and just soften the tone of the mediation so that we can get things done. The note that I wrote for myself is mediation is an opportunity for parents to explore and work on their new co-parenting relationship. So here's how I see it. You have two changes in your relationships if you're a parent going through a divorce. First of all, you're going from being a spouse to being single. Then you're going from parents in the same house to co-parents in different homes. That is a different relationship switch. That is a different mental switch. There are different skills and talents that are going to be needed. And so mediation offers the opportunity for the mediator to help work through that role reversal. And I like to identify to the clients, to the parties, you're going through a relationship reversal, a change. So just know that there's a shift taking place. And I think that lays the foundation for them to now get into a different headspace.
Right.
It's almost like a mediator is a divorce doula. It's taking it into a new life. It's the whole process. It isn't just boom, you got your divorce. It's really an introduction to how is this new life? How are you going to raise children together apart? How is this going to work? And Judith, piggybacking on what you said about the new relationships, it occurred to me after we spoke the other day that you had mentioned these the new relationship. It's also a new relationship between the now divorced parent and each child. And you mentioned a kid who really wanted his dad to be alone. He didn't want dad and stepmom and step sibling and he wanted dad alone because he was working on a new relationship instead of mom and dad and me. It's now me and dad and me and mom. And I thought that was really an interesting insight that you provided. All these
Yes.
relationships are shifting.
Excuse me, I'm going to grab and get water in a second. But yes, so what parents don't realize and what I learned throughout my years as a mediator, you learn from your own clients, is that the child has a different attachment level. Carol, you probably know everything about this as a therapist, but I'm not a therapist.
Mhm.
And so, yes, if a child is vocal and says, I need you by myself, mom or dad, take them by themselves. That's very emotionally intelligent to even be
Right.
able to say that, right? And identify.
Yes, one-on-one time is very important. I agree with you. You use the word tone, Judith. And I think that mediation sets the tone for more cooperative co-parenting. And it helps the child understand that the parents are working together in their best interest, in the child's best interest. I find that in this new relationship that parents have when they're divorced, they are really divorced. If they're parents, they're divorced to each other, not from each other. Because that relationship is going to stick. They're going to have to be parents together for a long time,
Yeah.
through many stages of this child's development and life and changes that they all are going to undergo and need to face those challenges. And I think that's where a mental health expert comes in very handy and is very necessary to really do psychoeducation with the parents and help them understand what their child is going through and be able to manage their own stress and constrain their own feelings
So
so they don't
question.
align the kid, you know, in an acrimonious divorce where it's, you know, you've got two attorneys fighting, there are loyalty conflicts that come up. And the kids who have a very hard time resolving ambivalence are going to take sides. It's very hard not to. And they know that mommy's going to court today and she's stressed out. She comes home upset. They're going to want to protect their mommy, you know, and you know, a lot of that can be mitigated in a successful mediation.
I think this is an excellent point, though, that the child is learning how to attach to each parent individually.
Mhm.
And each parent has to be ready to give that time to their child to build that relationship without the other parent around.
I don't think we're aware until we are in this situation how much we, when the two parents are together, how much each parent sort of bolsters or maybe doesn't bolster the other, but there's always that kind of um, um, mediated quality of the relationship by having the other parent nearby. You know, listen to your mom. You know, little things that parents do um, to hold each other up. And there won't be that person there to hold you up vis-a-vis the children. You are now on your own. And that's
We call it a united front.
a united front, yeah. And maybe if it's a divorcing couple, maybe there wasn't that united front, but the kids saw the parents as a unit, you know.
Mhm.
Exactly. But doesn't this also mean that the parents have to straighten out their relationship, whatever it was that caused the divorce, really take care of that as much as possible so that you can co-parent well? Because don't you think that parents are still working through the reasons for the divorce at the
Yeah,
same time?
yeah, yeah. I mean, the dynamics are still there. The dynamics don't go away
Yeah.
because they're in two different homes. You know, they just have to learn to manage those dynamics in a healthier manner. And you know, sometimes a separation does you know, have a very ameliorative effect on those dynamics because they're not at each other's throat all the same time in the same house. I've seen families where the parents actually get along a lot better after they're separated. And, there's always room for growth and room for improvement.
What happens when the parents don't take care of issues? And here's one example that is off the charts. I had mediated for and filed for a divorce where they were very contentious, but they didn't want to go to court. He was so angry at her. I mean, beyond belief angry at her. And he was a therapist himself. Okay, so they had one child around 9. I met the child before the divorce was final, and I'm not a therapist, but I knew there was something that a therapist needed to take hold of with this child because he comes in my office for the first time, meets me, and literally latches onto my leg and wouldn't let me go as I'm walking through the office. Okay, this is not typical. I'm a stranger to him. 2 years goes by. I get a call from the wife. She was in a stressed out situation, and she said, look, something I never talked about during the divorce, but there has been some sexual impropriety between dad and the child, and it started in infancy, and I was too afraid to say anything during the divorce.
Wow.
Wow is right, right?
Yeah.
Ah, that kid did need help, and so did the mother.
Well, but the point goes to a therapist is so important. An attorney is important teaching the law before you get them in mediation, and a therapist is so important for everybody in this transition.
Right. Marvin, what are your thoughts about this, about mediating versus going to court? What is your perspective on that?
Well, I appreciate everything that's been said so far, and I think it's especially Carol when you're saying that people have to address their emotions and their relationships because they do. I think probably for me the biggest advantage to mediation over going to court is because you don't have to go to court because the court process is meant to be adversarial.
Mhm.
It was constructed that way. So there's no way around it. So once you're in court, you're at each other.
Mhm.
And mediation is just working in the opposite direction, as Judith pointed out initially. It's to quiet the situation down and control conflict, and so that people can actually reason, because people cannot reason when they're excited emotionally and they're angry at each other and they're going back and forth. They're not really reasoning. So I think that's probably the main benefit, because the last thing a couple needs when they're going through a divorce is another adversarial situation. They're already in one.
Right.
None of you have mentioned this, why I feel compelled to say that mediation is so much more affordable. And,
Mhm.
it's not really tacky to mention that because the fact is,
No,
this is a family that's going from one household probably to two.
right,
The
right.
expenses are going to be very different. Somebody might be going back to work who hadn't been working. Things are going to be very different, and the costs are going to be high. Um, and so, in order to have the money for the piano lessons and, the little nice extras, being able to afford the soccer uniform and maybe even each parent take the children on a little vacation each year. It doesn't have to be something fancy, but just a little getaway,
Mhm.
sort of establishing their new unit. Those things really matter to families, and I think that having enough cash on hand to be able to do the little things like that, after a divorce, uh, to throw that much money at an adversarial process that could be better spent on the children. Again, it's centering the children, their best interests. So an affordable, efficient way to do this, which is mediation, benefits everybody. It benefits the pocketbook, but that trickles down to the kids because then there'll be more resources.
And along with that, Susan, is people really can, if they put their mind to it, calm down. Unless there's some serious thing going on with you, the average person can, ergo. somebody, they'll start the process with me maybe, and they just can't stop fighting. So then they hire attorneys, they spend a ton of money, or they start with attorneys and they spend a ton of money and nothing's getting resolved. And all of a sudden, we each, Marvin, me, Susan, Carol, we each get the call to say, okay, we'd like to mediate. After they've spent all the money they can possibly spend, now somehow they're able to sit down and talk. And maybe that's just the growth process that has to take place. But to your point, yes.
But I
Lots of
find that
money.
it often does reflect the personality of the parent, no matter how wealthy they are. I've seen very wealthy people be able to go through mediation.
Oh, yeah.
And they find an attorney that reflects them as a mirror of their personality. And if their personality and the dynamics allow for it, if they're sophisticated, sensitive, evolved people, they can do mediation. They don't have to feel that they need a gladiator in the ring fighting for them. Sometimes these fights get very bloody, not just expensive. There's a reason that in family law court you go through a metal detector.
Yeah.
There have been terrible outcomes of custody battles where they literally fight to the death. It's terrible. So anything that will de-escalate is important, for their life, for their child's life, for everybody involved. The de-escalation is so important.
What are some of the techniques that you use to de-escalate the conversation in real time and also going forward? So it's not just today at the mediation, how we're going to talk and how we're going to behave. Maybe Marvin, you could talk about this a little bit, like how you de-escalate inside a mediation and also prepare for better communication going down the line. How does that look for you?
Well, one important thing is that the mediator actually model effective communication. And part of that is tone of voice and volume of voice. People who are, if the mediator voice is up here, it's high, that's where people are going to respond. If the mediator brings his voice down here, then that's where they will want to respond, whether they do actually or not. Sometimes that doesn't happen. But you're ahead of the game if you can make that change to the situation, because I don't think I've ever mediated a couple that were just very calmly spoken throughout. Someone is going to be, one might start that way, but the other one does not. And then it escalates. So I think it's very important to start there to help people to control themselves.
Do you start with ground rules?
Yes and no. I think the biggest ground rule I have is be respectful of each other and try to be kind to one another. I send a list of ground rules to them before the mediation. I say, you can agree to these. Rarely do they ever sign them and send them back. Some people do, but rarely do they sign them and send them back. And even if they do, it doesn't matter. They're going to communicate the same way they communicate any other time. So I don't really get into stressing that in a marital situation. In some other situations, maybe it's more beneficial, but I don't find it to be myself. So
From the first phone call that comes into the office through the mediation, it's about communication with me. So I completely agree with Marvin. It's the tone of voice you use and the words you choose that help the communication going forward. And that's what this is about. It's about communication. When people call me, I just do little pro bono communication work with them, and I show them how to rephrase things. I show them how to take out the second person second person pronoun. Stop using the word you. Use we, use us, use third person, because what that does is it takes people off of being on the defensive. When you use the word you, so it's little techniques and like that I try and show people. And then I also try and say, if one person is a little stronger personality and they like to tell the other person the way things are going to go, or what the situation is, I just say, look, maybe there's fear going on. Your husband or wife isn't an attorney. This is your first divorce. They're doing the best they can. Let them say what they say. Let me take over when we get in the mediation room. And just relax. You don't have to answer every issue that comes up. And I'll take over from there. So I think people need that. What does I take over mean? Really nothing other than I will set the tone.
Well, they need to know there's an adult in the room besides them. Before I see people, I have them sign a safe harbor agreement and a non-testimony agreement for me, to keep me in a neutral, out of the battle zone, to keep me neutral. And I think that communicates this is a safe harbor. This is not where we're going to, scream and fight and yell and continue the negative dynamic that led to this. It's problem solving. And sometimes I say, before we end our session today, I want to help you solve one problem. We'll have one problem solved before we end the session today. Mm-hmm. And it gives them a positive direction to work toward together.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be something teeny tiny, but it's a quick win. And that sets the tone going forward, that we are going to solve a whole bunch of problems, starting with who drives them to their flute lesson all the way to,
Just one is okay. Just we'll have a goal.
And it leaves them feeling like they've accomplished something. They've sat down and worked out a problem together, which is the whole.
Right. I'm kind of saying, don't waste my time and your money. Fight outside of this.
Right.
Let's do something productive together.
Carol, I'm going to steal safe harbor from you.
You may.
Don't mind. I love that. I felt good when you
I'll send
said
you my
that.
agreement. I'll send you my template.
Okay.
I had it worked on with a mental health attorney, so I know it's bona fide. Of course, people can break it anytime. It's not.
Right. But along with the safe harbor, Susan, here's what I do. And Marvin, let's see if you do the same thing. I look at the series of things we have to talk about. I pick as the first thing, the thing I know that's the easiest that we can get an agreement on, just so we can start in a positive way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like what you said.
Yeah, I call it a quick win, just something that sets a positive momentum going.
Well, and it's also a message, keep me out of the middle and keep your child out of the middle. That's the work. That's the bulk of my work, is to keep the children out of the middle. The tug of war is very damaging to a child. And when they're secret keepers and messengers and have to play, I love this parent more than you and you more than that parent, it's very damaging.
Yeah. I think that happens when parents can't step out of their own ego needs, and they really do jeopardize. They're taking advantage of a child to support their own needs and making the child
it's called a parentified child.
Yeah.
Parent when a child is taking care of a parent's feelings and their needs.
Say that again, Carol. I never heard that.
It's called a
parentified
child.
And
the word
the child caring for the parent. The child.
It's called parentification, when a parent assigns that role to the child, that they have to take care of their needs.
Thank you.
It especially happens with parents who have substance abuse problems.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing that is occurring to me as I'm thinking about this is that if a child is quite young, let's say 3, 4, 5, when there's a divorce, that child's understanding of it is going to be very limited because of their life experience is limited, and their emotional development is still very young, very immature.
Mhm.
I imagine, Carol, that kids revisit divorce at different you know, when you're 9, it's different. When you're 15, when you're
Right,
22, when you're getting married yourself, you know, and you're thinking about your parents' divorce. I mean, those things have reverberations over the years too.
right.
And there's no way to stop that from happening, but I think if it's traumatic and really hard on a kid, then those reverberations will also be more powerful and more damaging as they reassess with an older brain and a more mature emotional equipment. We want them to be able to revisit their parents' divorce at different stages of maturity without trauma, without re-traumatizing themselves.
Right. Well, that's the operative word is trauma, because
Mhm.
kids will get stuck at an age at which they were when something traumatic happened. And I think the key to that is rebuilding trust. You know, here are the people that were supposed to protect them from any harm befalling
Mm,
in their life, and they didn't. And I think I
mm.
think it goes back to, it's a very primitive beginning, but I think they have to rebuild trust in that attachment before they can move on and grow kind of with this loss. So the loss doesn't define them, it's just part of them. It's part of their history, it's their narrative, but it's not their defining quality as a person. You know, you talk about a child of divorce. I don't know. I think, you know, children are children. They don't have to be a child of divorce. They're a child of many things. And a divorce is just one thing that happened to them. Another thing is to be able to find a way for that child to regain an internal locus of control in their life. This happened to them. It was overwhelming. It was externally controlled.
Mhm.
And if they can find a way to find an internal locus of control and have a voice in the process, not necessarily direct the custody, because they're not in the driver's seat, but to have a voice in what happens in their life. And what would you like to do this weekend at mom's house or dad's house? And do you want to, and have a time when they call the other parent? Contact with the non-custodial parent doesn't cease when they're with the custodial parent. They have
Okay, so that's an
they
interesting.
have to have built-in phone time, or even if it's week on, week off schedule, they have to have a night during the week where they see the other parent,
And
where
just
they're
for our
continuity.
listeners who may not know the terminology, when you're saying non-custodial, you just mean the parent whose house the kid is not at right now, because
Exactly,
they're back
exactly.
and forth in some sort of
In
predictable
shared
pattern.
custody
Gotcha.
situation. Right,
Yeah. And both parents alternate custody. It's not
right.
like one has
But
custody.
because attachment is so vital, the continuity of that attachment must be protected.
And both,
And in order for that to happen, Carol,
Mhm.
the parents have to have worked on their relationship. They have to have resolved as much as possible what happened in the marriage so they can be open with each other, right? And
Right,
flexible to the
yeah.
child's needs,
Flexibility,
like
yes.
calling the other parent. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Carol, would you talk a little bit about the various ways that mental health professionals can be brought into a situation like this? Uh,
Well, usually they're referred, you know, the mediator or the attorney will refer them to me or a mental health professional. Um, and or sometimes they're self-referred, you
They're just
know.
taking care of themselves by,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So it's not a hard sell. I mean, I don't think divorce is a diagnosis, but it certainly um brings a hailstorm of anxiety into one's life. And that anxiety based on uncertainty and a confusion, especially for a child, is, oftentimes needs somebody to help guide it along, or a place to talk about it.
Mhm.
Most importantly, to talk about it and then diffuse some of the factors that are exacerbating the anxiety.
Yeah. So you're talking about a child having their own therapist for a time.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And, I mean, flexibility, like you say, I've seen, the whole family or the children in a family or just the child and farm out the other people. It really depends on the situation. But I think flexibility is really important, and being available. I say the family's the patient. Being available to everybody is
I
is
agree.
is very important. And flexibility within the custody schedule. If a child has an activity, or adolescents in particular want to have a sleepover and a party and go to a dance on one parent's time, oftentimes that parent, no, it's my time, you can't do that, it's my time. It gets very dicey, especially with adolescents. They need to be able to grow and develop and separate, especially
So,
from the
yeah,
parent.
being the custodial parent for a few nights or a week or whatever the schedule
Mhm.
dictate isn't a date, is not a permanent date with your child, but they have to give you their undivided attention. And teenagers should have their life
Right, right,
independent of both parents.
right. And that can be very a very touchy subject for some parents who feel they have to monopolize the kid's time when it's that's my time. That's what we agreed to in mediation, or that's what the court says. It's that's not a child-centered response. And I help the parent be I educate them about what the child is going through developmentally,
Mm.
especially adolescents.
They need their own life. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is another way to involve a therapist. I don't know if Marvin or Susan, you've done this, but I have a couple times the therapist attends the mediation.
Mhm. Yeah, I've been
If
in
it's
many.
if it's a really volatile situation, maybe if there's substance abuse going on and the therapist has somehow been involved in helping that. I've had therapists participate in the mediation, and I found it quite helpful the times that that the therapist
Well,
attended.
it is very helpful to me because there's his side, her side, the truth, and what really happened. And I like to be there and know what really happened.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Marvin, you talked about having a calm demeanor, which you definitely do, and how that sort of is contagious for people. Um, and then, they do go out of bounds, of course. But it sounds to me like it's almost like co-regulation. They're sort of borrowing your calm and your steadiness in the event of a mediation as it unfolds. They're getting to practice being calm and problem solving and working hard without yelling or blaming or you this and you that. Is that kind of what you meant?
Um, Actually, it does work out that way. I think of when you said that, I thought of one couple in particular. Um, they came to the mediation. The wife was relatively calm. The husband wasn't, but he explained to me he had just found out about the situation, that his wife wanted a divorce maybe a couple of weeks before. So he was not in the same place she was. And they were at each other constantly. And I think that's just a way of communicating, as I have worked with them a few times. But I noticed when they would come back to me that they were actually more regulated in their communication. Not that it was perfect, but she was calm. She actually, as it turns out, she began to get upset more than he did.
Mm.
He actually did actually try to model it, and I think he did a pretty good job. He's able to maintain a balance when she is not sometimes, and that helps them. So I'd have to say yes. I think that is the case in many cases, and it doesn't always happen right away. Sometimes it's something for them to aspire to,
Mm.
and they do over time. So
Takes practice. If you're not used to the discipline of self-regulation, it
yes,
takes practice like learning to crochet or play tennis or anything. It's practice, you know, and
yeah,
some people come from very chaotic families where everybody's always yelling and throwing dishes. You know, if that's your background, you don't really have
and
those
that's another
skills.
thing. You have to be able to recognize where they are on their scale of relative calm,
Mm-hmm.
because
Right.
what
What is
you
this
what you're
calm?
seeing is very aggravated, may be pretty calm for them. So
Right. Right. I think that's really true. That is definitely true. It really is kind of co-regulating, I think, in a way. Um,
In therapy, we call it the lending ego.
the lending. Talk about that. What does that mean?
The lending ego, which is that ego meaning, your conscious sense of self
Hmm.
that regulates your unconscious sense of self or your more highly regulated superego conscience. Um, it's a way of role modeling, basically, what Marvin was saying. And, people were, Homo sapiens were, we were apes at one point. We do imitate, we do model behavior.
Hmm.
And oftentimes I'll go back to say, remember what we talked about or how you felt when you said something this way or when you did this, and it, you know, your child responded so well to that. It's like I'm putting that healthy sense of parenting, I'm transplanting it basically into
Yeah.
them.
And people are probably more than anything else grateful to
Oh
have,
yeah.
it's
Mhm.
it's kind of like
I
back to
think so.
what Judith said about you were talking about it's okay if he yells, I'm here, in a way
Mm-hmm.
you're absorbing some of it and
Mm-hmm.
responding to him so she doesn't have to.
Mhm.
And power balancing too. If one person's a yeller and always powering over the other person, a big part of mediation is just making them feel like equally valued people in the room. Because that may not at all define their relationship. One of them may be very dominant. And so
Absolutely.
in mediation, you're both okay, you're both as good as, and I'm going to do the power balancing necessary. Sometimes one person, will say, "Oh, I was a little angry," and you can say, "I saw your face. You were seething. You were really, really." It's almost like writing their words in the same font. One of them is talking in
Mhm.
little bitty font, and the other one is very florid and expressive, and they're just going on and on. And the person who speaks in teeny tiny font needs to be heard too, and needs to have their font magnified so that their voice is equally valued and heard. And that's a huge thing in mediation, is just power
it
balance.
is.
Yeah.
It is, and it's interesting that you should bring it up that way, because um, I know as mediators we talk about people needing to be heard, but I think it relates to exactly what you said, because in their relationship, some people aren't heard, and so the fact that someone is actually willing to listen to them means everything to the party. So it's not only just that they get to tell somebody, but it's that they actually get to express themselves with that other person. So
And all these communication practices or habits that are going on in the mediation ideally will carry forth. And how does that happen? Talk about how that happens when you're you know, thank you very much, you shake hands, they send you a check and you're done. What do they do that is going to help sustain these good communication habits? What do you set up for them in the mediation? This is something that absolutely doesn't happen in court. How do you coach
Well,
them forward?
I don't set up anything because I can't. I can't control them once they leave the office. I can do my best in the mediation and hopefully they'll pick some things up. I do, I do talk about co-parenting communication classes and co-parenting classes that can take place after the mediation, but I don't think I can do anything more. Now, sometimes they will call me and
Mhm.
just mediation's over, divorce is over. Sometimes they will call, Judy, can you just give me a sentence or two to say this came up? I don't mind doing that.
Mhm.
Happy to
A little bit
accommodate
of
that.
conflict coaching
I,
from the sidelines. Yeah.
I think you do more than you think, Judy,
Really?
because
Really?
I think the fact that they were in the mediation and you're modeling the communication and you're coaching them on how they should be communicating is actually doing just that. It's not that you're giving them a plan. It's that you've shown them the practical value of doing it that way. And so some people will pick it up and some people won't. But I agree to a point. There's nothing that you can do because they're going to ignore you if they don't want to. They don't want to do it. So I think the couple that I mentioned earlier is a prime example of a couple actually picking up on it and trying to carry through with it because they saw how destructive their behavior was in the
Mm.
mediation when we began. And as we work through, it has been nothing like that. And now, the last time I saw them, they came in and reflective of what you told me once, Judy, about the couple who came in and just talked and told you to shut up. This particular couple
It's a
came
good
in and
story. It's a
basically
good
did the
story.
same thing to me, only not in so many words. They
Wow.
started talking
So
and
you
they
just become
worked
a
everything
potted
out.
palm, just
They
in the
worked
room.
everything out, but they needed someone to be there and they trusted me to be there with them
Mhm.
for that communication. So occasionally I would have to, I insert a little something, but for most of the conversation, I was just sitting there observing. So
I'm
That's
really
interesting.
happy you had that experience because we made fun of me when I was telling that story, but it was Susan Carroll. He brings up a great example because I countless mediations, 6 hours at a time.
Oof.
They didn't want me to speak. They wanted me to witness. So I just said,
Exactly.
well,
Yeah.
can I eat? I mean, the kitchen's right next door. Can I at least have lunch? They
Yeah.
said, do what you want to do. Just don't speak. Okay, fine.
Yeah. 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 Oftentimes I find my role is to just bear witness to
Really,
see who
Carol?
these people are and how they're communicating. But I
Oh,
have also seen it stipulated in many agreements that they come to co-parenting therapy, once a month for a year or whatever it is. It can be ordered and it can be agreed to. And I think
okay.
it's helpful if it is, because so many things come up ongoing that need to be discussed together and decided upon together.
And also some communication stuff can be built into the agreement, like using My Family Wizard or something like that to
Yeah,
diffuse,
yeah,
um, to sort of neutralize conversations, I would say, if people are really having trouble communicating, they can use
yeah, yeah. I find
advice.
our friend wizard is very helpful.
Yeah, because you know
it
you're really
takes
speaking to a robot, and they both know each at each end that they're getting a robotic message, so they don't say, "What did you mean by that?" or "That sounded snarky," or
But they know I'm reading it and their attorney and their mediator are reading it if
they're
there's a
watching. People are
yeah,
watching.
yeah. And there's kind of a tone meter on it.
This
So
reminds me, honestly, I used to be a preschool teacher, and sometimes when two toddlers are fighting over a toy, you don't need to yell from across the room, "Hey, you two!" If you go over and just sit right next to them, they kind of quietly work it out because just that adult presence. And I haven't said a peep. I've just got up off my duff and walked over and sat down really close to them. And often that's all it takes to diffuse a situation because they both kind of go, "Oh, okay," and they just You just get a grip, you know? Yeah, right. And that's all it takes is just, like you say, an adult in the room. In that case, it really was an adult in the room. Um, yeah, conflict is, it's so normal. It's so aggravatingly normal. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
mediation is hard. Mediation is not normal. The way
right.
we have to discuss things. I was a party at a mediation. It was a business mediation. I was so happy I had that experience so I could understand. I mean, I was already a mediator, but I understand the nervousness and you have to, don't speak when the other person, but wait a minute, you said it. Can't do that. It was very interesting to sit in our client's seat for a minute.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, mediation is, it's kind of a ceremony of respect. It is very formal in some ways. It can feel chatty and informal, but it's got a structure to it. And so, you're right, it isn't normal. It's something we do, um, when conflict gets out of hand.
We have to learn. We have to learn how to communicate in conflict. It's so very difficult, I think.
It is. Marvin, you mentioned something interesting about the couple where one of them had probably been harboring thoughts of divorce for some months, maybe even years, and then finally gets up the nerve to tell the other one they want a divorce, and this other one is gobsmacked and has no idea. I mean, oftentimes it's not like that. People kind of mutually work their way to a divorce, but I think it isn't unusual for somebody to be completely surprised. And so they're really at different stages of grief or whatever, acceptance, whatever. They're just in a very different place. One of them is kind of still reeling, and the other one is maybe feeling some relief that the cards are on the table, that we're starting to fix this situation and get some resolution. How do you get them on the same, is it just time or what?
Yes, it does take time, and that's the usual situation. That's not the exception.
Mm,
One party decides, and then the other party is brought into that decision. But usually, it's not. I remember a situation where um, a man called me wanting to set up a mediation, and he hadn't told his wife yet
Mm.
because she was out of town. So she learned about it when she got back to town, that he wanted a divorce and that he wanted to mediate. Obviously, they were not in the same place. And that's usually the way it goes. One party decides and then expands that decision to the other party.
mhm.
Now they can talk after that. Sometimes it's been quite a while since that's happened. And so they've talked through things and they've actually come to a common place. But usually that's not where they start.
They're not
Judy,
in the same.
what are your experience?
Well, when I did the TED Talk 2 years ago, 3 steps to an amicable divorce, the very first step was you must allow your other spouse to have the time that you just had processing whether you want a divorce or not. If you do, how are you going to explain it to your other spouse? When, under what circumstances? And then to realize that you were taking time to grieve
Mhm.
and process. Therefore, you have to allow the other spouse that time. You can't ask them to get into the legal process. So I talk about the emotional divorce first, then you file for the legal divorce, and mediation is part of that filing. But yeah, you have to allow your other spouse time. So I will get the call too. I don't understand why they're just not responding. I don't know. You told them 5 minutes ago you wanted a divorce. They're not going to respond right now. You're lucky they're not responding. Who knows how they would respond?
If they were, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let them go silent.
exactly.
Oh, well,
So
what
we're gonna,
about, I have a question for the group, especially you, Carol.
Mhm.
So what about the initial conversation with the children?
Mhm.
Mhm.
How does that go? Because I know what I suggest people do, but you're the mental
Mhm.
health professional. I'd like to hear from you.
Well, first of all, I think it's important not to disclose this to the children until it's really decided, not a possibility. we might, because then that really puts a lot on the kid, like they have to fix it, or they have to be really good, or they have to act out so a parent can't leave. They won't leave if I'm really terrible. So the decision has to already have been made that this is what they're going to do. And then I think telling them together, being in the same room. I never allow it to be in my office because that will contaminate the setting. The kids will always remember that's where they heard their parents were getting divorced. I think it also depends on the age, but not on a school day and not at bedtime. Those are the things to avoid. And I think there has to be a way to say, again, considering what the child can handle, what the parents think their understanding is, that there are going to be some changes. An adolescent is going to be worried that they have to be uprooted from their school and their friends. That's the most important thing. A 2-year-old is going to be worried that they're going to lose a parent. And a 6-year-old is going to be worried that everything's going to be fair, and that they don't have to be in the middle of it. So one thing I think also is to tell the child, we're not going to be married or together anymore, but we're still going to be your parents. You will always be our child. We will always be your parents. That isn't going to change. You don't divorce your child.
So the parents are still a we.
Yes. Yes.
With regard to their children, they were always going to be a we.
Right. And also to do it without blame. Because that's such an easy thing. That's such an instinct to fall on. That it's nobody's fault. Our feelings changed. We think that we'll get along better if we don't live in the same house. We're going to have 2 houses and you're going to be part of both homes. We'll figure out a way that you see us both all the time so that attachment isn't threatened. So again, I think there's a way to tell a 2-year-old and there's a way to tell a 12-year-old, and they could look very different.
Right.
So Carol, I guess the answer would be no. When one of the parents says, well, I think we really have to say that she had an affair. I mean, we have to be honest. Believe it's been said.
Yeah. And a savvy 15-year-old is going to know what's going on, and I've had kids who say, oh, good, I don't have to hide under the bed anymore when you fight.
Oh.
I don't have to listen to this. I've had kids that are in college say, oh, they're finally getting divorced. I wish they did it 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that. Yeah.
It can be a blessing. It can be a blessing, really.
Living with that ongoing conflict is very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And that speaks to the fact that children are very observant. And most parents don't believe their children realize what's going on, but they do.
Of course they
Almost
do.
from the beginning, they realize what's going on. They know there's a problem.
Well, yeah, there's a reason Shakespeare always had the child be the sage in his plays.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. The truth teller.
Children will listen.
Yeah.
Even Sondheim did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do listen.
They listen.
That's a really good point,
the,
Marvin. I was it's a very good point, Marvin. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah,
You're
it
right.
really is. It really is. And there's a wonderful book called Mom's House, Dad's House, which unfortunately the title's a little dated since we have lots of households that are 2 dads or 2 moms. But it's by Isolina Ricci, R-I-C-C-I. And his children are great observers and not such good interpreters. And that's where the therapy comes in, is they're noticed everything, but what do they make of it? They often need a lot of emotional support to make something of it that makes this coherent and
yeah, because they tend to take the blame on themselves. So
yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's important in the discussion, that it's nothing you could have done. differently or nothing you can do differently.
Yeah.
But both the angelic behavior and the acting out behavior are strategies to try to change the reality, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they have to be understood as such, both.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd
Good
like
enough
to
for-
add, they need to be honest with the children to a
Mhm.
point, not overly honest, like
Right.
Judy was suggesting,
No
but
grief
Oh,
and
yeah.
detail, yeah.
some people do want to do that, but they
Right.
need to be honest with children and actually include them
Yes.
because they feel very hurt and left out if they're not included.
Right.
Well, on that note of honesty and inclusion and emotional warmth, I think we have to conclude because it's 1 o'clock and everybody's got to get back to their lives. Thank you, all three of you, for a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susie. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for
Bye-bye.
asking.